let's talk about the signing ceremony where the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, he officially approved, these 4 Ukrainian regions joining the Russian Federation, annexing them. I mean, I did many videos on this, going into detail about it, but I still wanted to bring you up to speed on how this went. So just to remind you very briefly, for those of you who haven't been following, we're talking about Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, right? So 2 of them, I told you in DPR, LPR, the question that was on the referendum was, do you want to join the Russian Federation or become a subject of the Russian Federation? And that was what's on the ballot because, those republics were declared a couple of months ago. And I think up until now, it's just Syria who's recognized them, right? So when it comes to Kherson, Zaporizhia, the question was worded differently. It was, do you wish to become an independent republic and then become a subject of the Russian Federation? Whatever. The result is the same. And we went through the referendum results together. It was overwhelming majority to join. I'll show you the international response in a second, but let me show you Putin signing the... This was a ceremony, okay? And this is a short clip. They're all chanting Russia. Here he is signing it.
Донецкой Народной Республики. Денис Владимирович Пушилин. Глава Луганской Народной Республики. Донецкой.
Official. Okay? It's official. And here was the response. You had a draft resolution in the United Nations Security Council to denounce and condemn the annexation. Here were the results. 10 in favor to condemn Russia, 4 abstentions, and 1 against. Do you notice who abstained? China, Brazil, India, Gabon. Now, this doesn't make sense to me because in the mainstream media, they were saying that Modi was sitting down and scolding Putin to his face. And they said that the Chinese did the same things, right? Like Russia's greatest allies, the Indians and the Chinese, were scolding Putin to his face. I told you that was going to turn out to be rubbish because, number one, they wouldn't provide you with it. I don't want to hear this CNN anchor. I just want to hear Modi saying it. Right, translated it to English. No, can't find it. So you're hearing Western, anchors who are from legacy media just telling you what they want to hear from India. But no, India is not going to condemn Russia. You know why? Because they've refused to do that the entire time since day one. They won't pass or vote any resolutions in the General Assembly or in the Security Council that condemn Russia or go against Russia's interests, right? Remember, Brazil and India are also BRICS countries. When we say BRICS, we're talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So these are a group of countries, you can dub them many ways, emerging economies, whatever. They're the future, right? Very simply put. And they're not going to jeopardize that future where, you have a rise of the global South, a rise of the East, and Russia's their next door neighbor, right, in their backyard. With all these natural resources, they're not going to jeopardize that because they don't see any avenue with the West. Now, I'll play you the various responses from India and China in just a second. Let me just show you Guterres, who's the UN Secretary General, what he had to say about this.
The Russian Federation is one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, shares a particular responsibility to respect the Charter. Any decision to proceed with the annexation of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, regions of Ukraine, would have no legal value and deserves to be condemned. It cannot be reconciled with the international legal framework. It stands against everything the international community is meant to stand for. It flouts the purposes and principles of the United Nations. It is a dangerous escalation. It has no place in the modern world. It must not be accepted. The position of the United Nations is unequivocal. We are fully committed to the sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders in accordance with the relevant UN resolutions. I want to underscore that the so-called referenda in the occupied regions were conducted during active armed conflict in areas under Russian occupation and outside Ukraine's legal and constitutional framework. They cannot be called a genuine expression of the popular will. Any decision by Russia to go forward will further jeopardize the prospects for peace. It will prolong the dramatic impacts on the global economy, especially developing countries, and hinder our ability to deliver life-saving aid across Ukraine and beyond. It is high time to step back from the brink.
Wow. Wow, Your Excellency, Mr. Secretary General. Why have I never heard you speak like that about Palestine or Syria? I wonder. Just so you understand why there were only 15 votes, we're talking about the UN Security Council, not the General Assembly. So in the UN Security Council, like Guterres was just saying, Russia is has a permanent seat, but you basically have a rotating presidency and 10 members that change. Whereas the permanent 5, the P5, that's the victors of World War II. It's China, the UK, US, France, and Russia. They always keep their permanent seats, and they also have veto power. Now, me personally, I think that this is one of the biggest flaws in why the UN does not work, is because you have countries like the United States protecting Israel with the veto power, right? So it's never going to work. Right, and even when they do pass resolutions, they don't abide by them, which I'll get to in a second. But just so you know who's on the UN Security Council right now, as I mentioned, we have the P5 up here, and then you have non-permanent members right now. That does seem, just by chance, it does include India and Brazil, who are in the BRICS, as we were talking about, and you have a slew of other countries in there as well: Albania, Gabon, Ghana, Ireland, Kenya, Mexico, Norway, UAE. So here's what the Indian ambassador said to the UN.
Is deeply disturbed by the recent turn of developments in Ukraine. The path to peace requires us to keep all channels of diplomacy open. India's Prime Minister has also emphasized that this cannot be an era of war. Keeping in view the totality of the evolving situation, India decided to abstain on the resolution. India is deeply disturbed by the recent turn of developments in Ukraine. We've always advocated that no solution can ever be arrived at.
I'm going to translate what she's saying. She's saying Russia's too valuable to condemn. And so we are not going to go against either one. And here the Chinese basically say the same thing.
Fourth, the current crisis in Ukraine is the result of the accumulation and interplay of various conflicts and tensions over a long period of time. Facts have shown that political isolation, sanctions, and pressurization, fueling the tensions, and bloc confrontation will not bring peace. Instead, they will only worsen the situation and make.
Yeah, so you see the language that the Chinese are using as well. They say we respect the sovereignty of both sides. They don't just say Ukraine. Which again doesn't even make sense, because if you're like Guterres, you're just saying we only respect Ukraine's sovereignty. Well, fine, but what about shouldn't you respect Russia's as well? You were just talking about the UN Charter. Of course, in the West, it's pick and choose whose sovereignty you respect. It's very, very difficult for me to take people. Or shall we say bodies even. It's not just the ambassadors, like the I'm going to play the UK ambassador in a second, but it's really difficult to take them seriously when they're coming out against Russia, because think about this. The UN Security Council actually passed multiple resolutions against Israel occupying Jerusalem, which Jerusalem was supposed to be its own thing, separate body, and the Golan Heights in Syria. So these are very, very specific. It's not just, in reference to the UN Charter. They're directed against Israel, right? And they're telling Israel to leave. And in addition to that, that was Resolution 242. And then in addition to that, they also passed another resolution saying that the laws the Israelis passed to annex Jerusalem, to annex the Golan Heights, are also null and void. So those are already passed. Everybody voted for them. And no one vetoed them. So they got through their past and they're not adopted, right? What's the point? When you open the door to these things and you let Israel get away with this and you let the United States get away with this, then it's very difficult to say that, oh, well, Russia can't do this. And even then, you can't compare the situation because Israel never held a referendum in the Golan Heights. There are no Israelis in the Golan Heights. Israel was not protecting anything. It's on the contrary, it's the one that is inside Syria and occupying Syria to this day, to this minute. So you can't even compare them. They're apples and oranges. But even then, since we're talking about the UN Security Council, condemning these things, nothing's been passed against Russia because Russia used its veto power to knock this down. And even if Russia had not vetoed it, pay attention, the Chinese, the Indians, they didn't vote for it. They abstained. So that shows you that on an international level, there is no agreement on what's going on there. When it comes to Israel, there was agreement. Even the United States was like, you need to leave. You have to go. And then there was another occasion where they abstained, but it still got through. They did not veto it, right? So again, this is the situation we're in. They create these precedents, right? Whether it's Iraq or when I say Iraq, I mean 2003. They could not get support from the UN, but the Americans and the British went and bombed Iraq anyway. So that shows that you don't give a crap about the UN. You don't care. You don't care about international law because when it suits you, you apply it and you cite it. And when it doesn't suit you, you forget about it and you ignore it. So how can we take you seriously now when you're complaining about Russia? Whatever Russia's doing, the West has done 1 million times over and undermined the UN decades ago, not now. It's not Russia's undermining the UN. Russia's just copying. And even then, like I said, apples and oranges. You can't even really compare the two. Here, I'll play very, very quickly. This is the UK's ambassador to the UN.
It's another example of Russia abusing its veto in order to cover up for its illegal invasion. But I think the important result is that no other country supported this illegal annexation by Putin of parts of Ukraine. And that's very clear now. We'll go to the General Assembly next week, and I expect that we'll see strong support again for this fundamental UN principle of territorial integrity and sovereignty.
Wow. Do you know your own history, woman? You're the British ambassador, and you have the nerve to talk about territorial integrity? How many countries have we pillaged and raped and plundered? The list is too long. I think there are more countries to celebrate independence from Britain than any other power. And you look at what's happening in Palestine to this day. That's a problem Britain created. Drawing these like arbitrary borders. Although when you say arbitrary, it's like you're saying they didn't know what they were doing. I think they knew very well what they're doing. They made them sectarian on purpose, right? And the French did that too. So, I mean, this is wow. We need a new word. Hypocrisy is too light. It's too mild. I don't think it's doing the job. Here, these are the Americans speaking at the UN.
As we meet, so-called referenda were just conducted by de facto authorities in the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions. Ukrainians were asked whether they approved their regions joining the Russian Federation. Voting took place in polling centers. De facto authorities, accompanied by soldiers, also went door to door with ballot boxes.
Yeah, and what about the sham elections that the U.S. they go in, like, topple a government, and then they set up a new government with these fake elections where no one is safe. The results are dubious. How many times has the U.S. done that in other countries? Or you've had someone elected who happens to be against the U.S. and then they go and topple them. Whether it's like in Iran, 1953, Guatemala the year after in 1954. They always undermine elections they don't like. So I'm having a really, really difficult time knowing the selective application of international law by the British and Americans, taking them seriously now. If you do this every year and and that's your foreign policy. You can't point fingers at Russia. It just doesn't make sense. I don't want to go after Guterres specifically because he's not the individual. He's not the problem. It's just that the UN fundamentally it's not working properly, you know. And they've allowed these things to go on for many decades, and no one does a thing about illegal annexations and so on when the West carried out. So, like I said, they opened the door to this. You reap what you sow. And, you know, unfortunately, it's not just about who does this land belong to. You have millions of people that become refugees. You have infrastructure being destroyed. There's war. There's chaos. And this is what's really bad and it destroys lives, many lives. So that's the human cost that you also have to factor in. When you look at a situation like this, you think, okay, well, there has to be a diplomatic settlement, right? When there's a war, it has to be concluded with a diplomatic settlement. The thing is that the Russians tried that before the war, right? That's what's interesting. They already came before and said, let's apply the Minsk agreements. Didn't work. And then they, in December last year, sent these proposals to Western diplomats and said, look, you can't allow Ukraine to join NATO. You know, Ukraine has to stay neutral. You can't deploy NATO troops on our borders. You know, like, for example, an American battalion in Poland, which would border Russia. So these sorts of things. He's basically telling them, back off, just get away from us, go away. And they told the Russians non-starter. That was the term they answered with, non-starter, which basically means piss off. So when the Russians tried diplomacy over and over, they told them to piss off. And then this happens, and you know, you got to look at the chronology here. Very difficult to take these Western diplomats seriously. It's very difficult.